Okay, welcome back to the next part of the video. In the last video, we got all of our fuel planning taken care of, so we know that we now have enough fuel to complete this mission. Got all of our systems resupplied. We've got our APU topped off, got our RCS topped off, oxygen, and then of course we made sure that we had enough payload, enough fuel in the payload area to make sure that we get all the way out to the moon. Now let's bring up TransX here on both sides, and we can see here in view target that we're 383,000 seconds away from the burn. You know, we have to go forward a few days, because you remember the moon's not in a good position at present, so we just need to warp time forward until we get over, you know, closer to that point. Now there's something else I want to do with my TransX configuration, but I'm going to wait until we're closer to the time to actually do the burn, because when you warp time forward this far, your predictions aren't that accurate, so we need to get much closer to the time to begin the burn before we do anything else in TransX. So I'm going to warp time forward. Let's go to 1,000. Let's go to 10,000. We can see the moon moving along here. And we want to get our time to begin the burn down to maybe 3,000 seconds, and then we'll start looking at doing some updates. I'm going to back off to 1,000 so I don't run the risk of overshooting. And we don't want to go all the way down to like 500 seconds just yet, because we want to give ourselves enough time to make sure that we can get TransX updated. So here we are, we're less than 1 orbit away. And that should be fine right there. So now we're maybe 3/4 of an orbit or so away from the time to do the burn. But now what we want to do is come forward on this side, and in maneuver mode we want to go to base orbit update and click ++, and that'll update everything and make sure that it's more current. And I'm also on this side, I'm going to turn maneuver mode off, because we only needed that to help us determine how much fuel we were going to use for that braking, for the lunar orbit insertion. So now I'm going to go to view setup and go back to auto plan and turn it back on. That way I can have view encounter. And now we just want to do some fine-tuning here. First of all, let's make sure we get our orbit out to the point where we're not hitting the moon. Okay. Now I want to start planning so that I can arrive at the moon in plane, close to in plane with Brighton Beach. So I'm going to bring up map MFD and reference the moon. Then I'm going to target Brighton Beach, because once you target a base in map MFD, TransX inherits that information, and it tells you how far off plane you are from the base that you're trying to target. Whereas if you don't have a base selected in map MFD, then you don't get this information. And we can see that we're currently 1,100 kilometers out of plane with the base if we use this plan. So let's tweak this plan a bit. We can use a bit of prograde, plus or minus. And if I see that putting in minus is making my off-plane distance worse, so I'm not going to use that. Instead, I'm going to go to the date variable and go to hyper. And just by changing the date a bit, which will either slow down or speed up our journey out to the moon, then that can help bring the off-plane distance down a little. So let's put in a bit of minus. You can see that helps significantly, but it raises our minimum altitude a lot. So now I'm going to go back to prograde and see what I can do to bring down the minimum altitude with prograde. Minus isn't helping, so let's go plus. And I'm at a point where if I put in some plus, it's only bringing the minimum altitude down to that point. And if I go minus, it's not really helping. So what I can do is go to outward. And I should be able to resolve this with outward. You can see that's bringing the minimum altitude down, and it's not having too much of an impact on the off-plane distance. Now let's go back to prograde. And by adding in, taking away some prograde. Now it looks like it's already at the best spot right there. So let's go back to outward again. And keep taking away some outward. And I'm not going for a 0 off-plane distance necessarily. It's as long as it's plus or minus 100 kilometers, then it should be fine. But it actually worked out here that we got a fairly low off-plane distance and a fairly low minimum altitude. And due to the inaccuracies of Transx, it won't do us any good to try to dial these in any more specific than that. So I'm happy with this just as it is. Now if I press VW to come over here to target, I can see that I'm still 3,100 seconds away from the time to do the burn, and that will give me enough time to undock from the ISS and get a little bit of distance between myself and the ISS before I do the burn. So let's turn off external cooling. Make sure the radiator is deployed. It is. So we're going to undock. Say goodbye to the ISS. And put in a little bit of 10x to speed up our departure from the ISS. And I'm going to put in just a little bit of translation, which is I'm pushing myself down just a little bit, and that'll give me a little bit of separation. I'm going to turn on the APU and close the nose cone. And turn the APU back off. And now I want to warp time forward until we're closer to the time to do the burn. And then I will do another Transx update. Just check everything out in Transx one more time at that point. Okay, we're 1,200 seconds away. We'll get a little closer. We'll get down to about 10 minutes. So when we're at 600 seconds, we'll check everything out. Right there. Let's bring this view back up so we have larger MFDs to look at. And we'll come over to View Maneuver. And we'll hit Update. And you can see things have changed a little bit since then, but not by much. So we're fine with that, how it is. So let's go to View Target and get ready to get
rotation.
Get ready to get into the position that we need to be in. Okay, that has us basically on the center line. So now I'll put in a little bit of yaw. And that should be fine. Now I'm going to warp time forward until I'm closer. I don't want to line the X up just yet because I'm still several minutes out, and that's going to go over. But now we're getting pretty close. So let's get everything lined up. And I was going to say, if we want, we could do another update real quick, but we really don't have time. Okay, so we're going to do the burn in about 10 seconds. I'm actually going to bring up this view, just so we can watch the fuel usage. Burning. And I got the main engines locked. I'll turn off the HUD so we can see the fuel usage here. And if we take a look outside, we have a nice view of the lighting effects since we're on the dark side of Earth at the moment. And it's kind of interesting to watch the acceleration over here. You can see the crew is currently experiencing 1.7 G. It's going to climb to 2 G, I believe, at some point. So that's a lot of acceleration. And we're going to go ahead and do this burn in real time instead of warping through it. Get our green X lined up there. And you can see how relatively quickly we're burning through the main fuel. We're almost done with one payload already. It'll be done at 75%. And we've got about 1,000 meters per second to go on this burn. It's a really nice looking light effect. I really like this Virgin Galactic repaint that guy did. It's a really nice looking repaint, and I'm definitely not one for skins and things like that. I just think that this one is especially cool looking. About 500 meters per second to go. And we're almost done with the second main fuel payload. Backing off the main engines. Okay, now what I'm going to do at this point, instead of fine-tuning that last 0.181, I found that I like this method better, something that I kind of learned from Dimitri. If you come over to maneuver mode and turn maneuver mode off at this point, what we can do, now that we've got maneuver mode off, we can just watch view and counter.
Translation.
And we can get the last little bit just by watching our information over here. And I'm just watching the off-plane distance. Make sure that that's down around 100 or so. And maybe bring the minimum altitude down a bit. Using a little bit of lateral translation for the minimum altitude. And we've got the minimum altitude down to about 250 kilometers, which I think will be fine. And then one last burst of translation for the off-plane distance. And I think that'll be fine. Trying to get it any more accurate than that at this point, I think will be a wasted effort. So that is our burn. We used about half of our fuel. So we used both of those tanks, and we could jettison those tanks, but we'll go ahead and keep them. Kind of do the same type of thing, just carry a little bit of extra mass, which will make everything a little bit more difficult. At least it'll make our burns cost more. Alright, now let me go back to this view so that we got the larger MFDs to look at. And we'll bring up orbit on this side. Do our normal changes here, projection ship. Distance doesn't really matter.
Rotation.
And we'll kill rotate. And now we'll put in some time warp to head out to the moon. And I'll go back inside the vessel to see where we're at. We're at 0.55. So here in just a little bit, we'll be doing our first mid-course correction. Want to wait till the Earth's gravitational influence drops to at least, 0.49. That information will update on the HUD. But I'm going to go ahead and press HUD to copy the Earth back up here rather than looking at the sun, because this gives me my orbital speed as I'm leaving Earth. You can see if I continue forward with 100, I'm continuing to slow down as compared to Earth, which is more useful than knowing what my orbital velocity is relative to the sun. Now, TransX does this thing where when you get away from a body or close to a body, it forgets the fact that you had a base selected. So I'm going to set draw base to no, and then we're going to bring map MFD back up, and we're going to target no base, and I'm going to target Brighton Beach again, and now I'm going to say draw base yes, and now I have this important information back. So according to TransX, we're only 1 kilometer out of plane with the base, which is quite good. And our minimum altitude is saying currently that it's 254 kilometers. But we know that that's not correct. But we're not off enough at this point to worry about trying to make a mid-course correction. And what we can do with regards to the minimum altitude, if we bring up interplanetary MFD and bring up the map, we can reference the moon, and this will give us a much more reliable number for what our PEA is going to be. And it's actually not too terribly far off from what TransX is reporting, but in a sense it is a lot, because 40 kilometers is, quite a bit of a difference when your target altitude is, say, 20 kilometers. So if we have a target here of 20 and we're off by 40 kilometers, then we could be subterranean. We could be under the moon at that point. We don't want that. So it's kind of useful to bring up interplanetary MFD to know what your actual PEA is going to be. So since interplanetary MFD is saying that we're coming up much higher than I want to be, I'm going to go ahead and do a little bit of a mid-course correction at this point. But instead of doing a maneuver, I'm actually just going to use translation thrusters to do this here.
Translation. Rotation.
And it probably doesn't really much matter what direction I'm facing. I could be prograde to the Earth or prograde to the moon or whatever, but it doesn't really matter.
Translation.
So I'm just going to use some control thrusters just to see what works. Okay, so that one is affecting my off-plane distance. Okay. Okay, that's bringing the PEA down. So just by doing a little bit of translation, and I'm using 9, which is reverse, and 1, which is lateral, but that doesn't have a lot of meaning because I'm not facing prograde to the moon or anything. So I'm just going to use these two to bring the PEA down. And I'm also kind of keeping an eye on the off-plane distance. I don't want it to get too far out, but this isn't very reliable yet, so I'm not too worried about having it, at 0. But I do want to bring the PEA down to something that is going to be more useful. And we'll go with that for now. Because if I bring it down any more than that, then TransX is going to be showing that I'm impacting the moon. And when it shows that I'm impacting the moon, it doesn't give me my off-plane distance anymore. Just seeing if I can do a little bit more correction with the off-plane. And that actually helps bring the minimum altitude down a little bit too. So I guess I can do a little more correction. Yeah, but we'll leave it at that. That was a very small amount of delta V, and I don't really even know how much I just used, but it was all a combination of control thrust translations, which are microbursts, and then a little bit of regular translation. So maybe 1 meter per second or 2 meters per second was almost nothing.
Rotation.
Now we'll kill rotate, and we'll go forward. Go ahead and reference the moon.
Translation.
Kill rotate. And let me bring up interplanetary real quick. Okay, it's still showing the PEAs right there at about 36 kilometers. I'll probably bring that down a little bit more. In fact, I'll do it now.
Translation. Rotation.
But let's get rotated back to the center line.
Translation.
Okay, so with just a little bit of lateral translation here, I'm bringing the PEA down closer to something that I want, which is usually about 20 kilometers around the moon. Any more than that, and you just spend a lot of time hovering for no reason. And the highest peak on the moon is just under 11 kilometers. So a PEA of 20 kilometers is realistic. And you could actually have a PEA of 200 or 300 meters for that matter, because orbiter doesn't have any terrain. But to keep things more realistic, I would like to keep the PEA up to about 20 kilometers. Okay, so we're happy with that. Let's
Rotation.
kill rotate and warp time forward. And as long as our PEA holds around 20 kilometers, then all we really have to concern ourselves with is this off-plane distance. Okay, it looks like we're now in the vicinity of the moon. No, not quite yet. Actually, we just crossed over the point where the Earth's influence became so weak that TransX updated. And since that happened, we have to do this again, where we select no base, target, no base, target, Brighton Beach, and then turn the base back on. And I guess actually currently our focus PD is currently below the surface, so we don't get our base information. But this will go up here as we go forward. You can see it's climbing. Once it reaches 1.738 here, then we'll get our information back. See right here, we're we're 2 kilometers below the surface of the moon. Now if I warp time forward, now we're 1 kilometer below, and then as soon as this gets above 1.738, we'll get our information back. There it is. Okay, let's see what interplanetary says. Still showing 20 kilometers, and I believe this is very accurate, so I'm not gonna need to bring that up anymore. So we know that our altitude out to the moon is going to be 20 kilometers, and our off-plane distance is still a bit of a mystery, but it should be very low. You can use interplanetary MFD to get a more accurate number for your off-plane distance as well, but I'm not completely sure how to do that yet. I have a vague understanding of it, but not enough to try to show it in this video. So we're 20,000 seconds away from reaching periapsis at the moon, and the moon is now the dominating gravitational influence, so we can copy that information over to the HUD.
Translation.
And let's just take a look at the moon. And just kind of notice that we're being quite efficient in this flight, more so than you would be used to with me. I tend to, in the past, I tend to use rotation a lot or prograde a lot. I'm trying to shy away from that these days. Okay, so Transx is saying that our off-plane is 6 kilometers and it's continuing to go down.
Translation. Rotation.
So what we can do
Translation.
is if we bump translation up down to see what helps, and I guess if it's negative, then I would think it would be 2 that would help, because that would push our vessel up. Yeah. So if we go just a couple of ticks of 2, and we're going to go high because it's going down. So let's go to maybe 5 kilometers. Probably not even that much. That even 4 kilometers might actually be too much, but if we go a little bit on the high side, then by the time we get over to periapsis, it should be closer to 0. Whereas if we set it to 0, then as we move forward, it continues to go into the negative.
Rotation.
Okay, let's warp time forward a little bit further, and then we'll set up our maneuver for doing our braking burn. Maybe I should say our lunar insertion burn. You can see that's getting closer to 0, and it looks like it may actually go all the way to 0 and keep going down. So yeah, that's going to happen. So let's put in a little more correction.
Translation.
Because once we're in orbit around the moon, any plane changes that we have to do at that point are far more costly than they are out here. Although they're not too expensive around the moon, because our orbital velocity around the moon is only going to be 1,600 meters a second, give or take. Let's go forward a little farther. And we'll just do a little more. You can see as we get closer, this doesn't count down as fast. once we're at 10,000 seconds, I'll set up the maneuver. I have a couple of ideas. Instead of doing the maneuver, I may use burn time calculator to do the orbit insert. Okay. If we wanted to do the maneuver, this is how we would do it. In stage 1, we go to maneuver mode, turn maneuver mode on, and we obviously want to do the burn at periapsis, not here. So we got to adjust the date to this number, 56330.7799. And it doesn't have to be exact. If you error though, make sure you error a little bit before this number instead of after it. So instead of 7806 or something like that, make it 1 or 2 before that number. And then we'll go to prograde, and it's going to be negative prograde, and we determined in the last video that it would be close to 900. I think maybe if we go to scale to view target, nope. I was hoping to get a zoomed in view, but it doesn't do it. But remember, it was close to negative 900. And what we're going to look for here is when the hypothetical PED starts to count down. That's when we know we've hit the point where the orbit is circular. So I'm going to do an adjustment and add back in until we're at 1758. And right about here, the orbit should be circular. So that's one option. And then we can come to view target, warp time forward until we get to that point, and do the burn. Another option would be to bring up burn time calculator, and we've got time to periapsis here. And we could just do the circularization. And then, when you get close to the periapsis point, you got to rotate retrograde, and then burn time calculator would do the burn for you. And since I usually do the burns using Transx, I'm going to go ahead and do it this way this time, just to show something different. So we're getting close to periapsis. Let's go ahead and rotate retrograde.
Rotation.
Just putting in one tap of rotation and then using 10x to rotate the vessel around. And what we'll do is we'll watch the encounter on this side, but we'll let burn time calculator take care of the burn. And by watching the encounter on this side, we can correct our last little bit of off-plane distance as we do the braking burn. So let's warp time forward. We've still got 2,000 seconds to go. go ahead and press the circularization button now. Have that ready to go. And this says that we have a total remaining delta V of 3,456 meters per second. Now my guess is that after the burn is done, it will be about 1,801. So something really close to that number after this. No, actually, let me take that back. It'll be about 2,556, somewhere within that range after this burn is done, after we're circularized. Put in a little bit of 100, get over there faster.
Translation.
Now our off-plane distance is nothing to worry about. It's only 1.5 kilometers, and that's nothing. But what I want to show is that when we're doing this burn, if we put in just a tad bit of pitch and just a very, very small amount, we can actually correct that last little bit of off-plane distance. Let me just think for 1 second about which way we need to be pitched. We're positive, so we need to be negative. But we're retrograde, so the burn's going to be backwards. So we need to push ourselves a little bit toward this direction. So I believe we need to be just slightly above the center line. Like that. And if I'm wrong, then I'll just pitch the other way, but I think that's right. It's such a small number that it's really almost a waste of time to even think about it. But I just want to demonstrate this principle, because if your off-plane distance was, say, 40 kilometers, then you might want to consider correcting it as part of this burn. Put in a little bit of 10x to get to the time to burn faster. And I'm not going to be able to use retrograde, the retrograde autopilot, just because I want to add in that little bit of up-down pitch. Okay, we're only 30 seconds away from the burn. Okay, real time. And I'm pitched the wrong way, of course. So let me pitch just a little bit below the line, and you'll see the off-plane distance. Actually, I did have it right. Okay, of course. Whenever I try to show something, other factors make me wrong. The reason this wasn't working out according to plan is because as the velocity changes, so does the off-plane distance, so we couldn't take care of that by pitching up and down. Nevertheless, let's see if this number was right. I said it would be about 2556, and it's 2548, so we're very close. So burn time calculator is definitely not too bad at getting your orbit circularized. But now for this part, I'll just take care of it the way I did before.
Translation.
With just a little bit of up-down pitch, or up-down translation. But you can see now that we're closer in, it's a little more difficult to get that correction. Okay. Let's take a look then at base sync, just so we can see, how far off we are. Closest passage, that's what we want. Instead of equator, we want direct, and we only need, I guess we can leave a bunch of orbits up. I'm going to turn the graphic off because it annoys me, and we're going to target Brighton Beach. And according to base sync, we're only 13 kilometers off. Maybe this isn't targeting the base anymore. That sometimes happens with Transx. So let's do this.
Rotation. Translation.
Now that we have base sync up, just by putting in a little bit of translation, we can see we're bringing the distance to the base down, at least on the first pass. The second pass, we're actually raising the off-base distance a little bit. So it just depends which pass you want to go with. But we're not going to worry about that for now. Let's bring up map MFD and see where we're at. We're here, and the base is over there. Nevertheless, we got over here pretty well, in my opinion. There really wasn't anything in the way of mid-course corrections. Just a couple meters per second was all it took. So now that we're here at the moon, and we have a nice circular orbit, I'm going to go ahead and end the video here, and then we'll pick it up in the next part. So if you have any questions about anything that I did here in this part of the video, go ahead and leave those questions down below. And if you like the video, leave me a comment. And I will see you in the next part. Let me save, Control S. Now I'll end the video.